Welcome to English Tutorial YouTube channel. Presented by Dr. Pradeep Kumar Mahata.
How to start speaking English without fear. Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Today we are going to talk about something that can completely change the way you learn English. If you have been studying English for years but still hesitate when you have to speak, this video is especially for you. Maybe you know hundreds or even thousands of English words. Maybe you understand grammar rules. Maybe you can read English articles, watch English videos, and understand many sentences. But when somebody suddenly asks you a simple question in English, something happens. You become nervous. You start searching for the correct words. You think about grammar. You translate the sentence in your head, and before you can answer, the moment has already passed. So today, I want to give you one very important message. If your goal is to speak English, spoken English must become a priority in your learning. Learning vocabulary is important. Grammar is important. Reading is important. Listening is extremely important. But knowing English and using English are not exactly the same thing. You can know a language without being comfortable speaking it. Speaking is a skill, and like every other skill, speaking improves through practice.
Imagine this. You've got like a vocabulary of maybe 5,000 English words.
Right.
You can just ace a master-level grammar test without even breaking a sweat.
Oh, sure.
But then you walk into a coffee shop and the barista casually is just like, hey, how's your day going? And your brain completely flatlines.
It just shuts down.
You freeze, the words just, evaporate. So today in our deep dive, we are hacking that exact moment of paralysis. We're looking at a methodology from our sources designed specifically to take you from like a passive student of English to someone who actually speaks it fluently in the unpredictable real world.
Yeah, and that freezing response, it's the ultimate developmental bottleneck.
Yeah.
Because what makes it so agonizing is that the failure doesn't stem from a lack of knowledge, right?
Right. It's not that you don't know the words.
Exactly. The failure occurs at the precise millisecond of execution. You have the data stored in there, but the retrieval system just crashes.
Yeah, let's look at the mechanics of that crash. Because we're dealing with a phenomenon where a learner knows exactly what they want to say, but when a live human being stands in front of them, anxiety basically takes the wheel.
It is a literal hijacking of your nervous system.
Wow.
Yeah, when you start constructing a sentence and immediately worry about the pronunciation or, the verb tense, your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, it spikes.
Oh, so it's a physical reaction.
100%.
What?
And that spike actively suppresses your prefrontal cortex.
Which does what? Exactly.
Well, that's the exact region responsible for complex cognitive behavior and language formulation.
Oh, wow.
So you aren't just nervous. Your brain is actively shutting down your ability to access your own vocabulary.
That makes me think of like someone trying to drive a high-performance sports car, but they're just sitting there studying the engine manual.
Right, yeah.
Like you know the exact compression ratio, you understand the thermodynamics, but you've literally never put your foot on the clutch. The moment you're dropped into live traffic, knowing the thermodynamics does not stop you from stalling the car.
Because the manual cannot build muscle memory.
Right.
So the methodology we're examining today, it requires this fundamental paradigm shift. English is not an academic subject like history or biology.
It's a tool.
Right. It's a physical, neurological tool. So when you freeze, it's because you're operating in like academic test mode rather than real-time communication mode.
Yeah.
That anxiety over imperfection, it acts as a cognitive circuit breaker.
So if the barrier to speaking is this overwhelming fear of not having the exact right verb tense, I guess we have to completely dismantle the idea that you need perfect English to even open your mouth.
We really do. We have to look at the most successful language learners on the planet, which are toddlers.
Right, of course.
A small child doesn't sit in a crib waiting until their neural pathways have formed a flawless, complex sentence structure before they speak.
Yeah, they'd never talk if they did that.
Exactly. They listen, they vocalize one sound, then maybe a broken word. They make countless errors, mispronouncing things, destroying syntax. But they keep trading.
But wait, hold on. This feels incredibly dangerous for an adult learner, right?
How so?
Well, if I just start firing off broken English, just randomly throwing words together, and I never stop to correct myself,
Yeah.
aren't I just hardwiring bad habits into my brain permanently? Like, shouldn't I wait until my grammar is at least decent so I don't cement those errors?
See, that waiting to be ready, it's a psychological trap.
Okay.
The framework we're exploring explicitly rebuts this fear of cementing bad habits by establishing a strict hierarchy of goals.
Which are what?
Your absolute first goal is communication, just transferring an idea from your brain to another person's brain.
Right.
Your subsequent goal is refinement. So if you stop every few seconds to internally correct a verb tense, you destroy the flow of communication.
Because you're constantly hesitating.
Exactly. You train your brain to prioritize hesitation over connection.
I see. So a clear, structurally flawed sentence that actually gets spoken is vastly superior to a perfect sentence that just remains locked in your head.
Yes, momentum supersedes precision at this stage. Clear communication beats fast communication, and it certainly beats silent perfection.
Right.
The act of continuous messy vocalization is the exact mechanism that triggers neuroplasticity.
Oh, the brain's ability to form new connections.
Right. You are proving to your nervous system that it is safe to produce these sounds.
So the actionable first step to put this into practice, it actually feels almost deceptively simple from what the text says.
Yeah, it starts with describing your immediate physical reality using the vocabulary you already have.
Like just looking around the room you're in right now and stating facts out loud.
Yes.
Like the door is open, the window is closed, my phone is on the table.
Right. And we shouldn't underestimate the cognitive heavy lifting happening during that simple exercise.
Really, just naming things.
Yeah, because you are forcing your vocal cords, your tongue, your jaw to adapt to the physical production of English phones.
Oh, that makes sense. The physical aspect.
And more importantly, you're bypassing abstract semantic processing.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you aren't reading a detached textbook sentence about a fictional character. You're anchoring the language to your physical environment.
Right.
This shifts the language from an abstract concept into a lived, tangible experience.
Okay, but anchoring the language to your physical reality is a great start. But as soon as you move beyond stating basic facts about a closed door, you hit this massive wall.
The translation lag.
Yes,
Yeah.
the translation lag, because you aren't actually generating thoughts in English yet.
And the cognitive load there is just immense.
Yeah.
The trap operates in 3 distinct phases. First, you formulate the concept in your native language. Second, you attempt to map that concept onto English vocabulary and grammar rules. And third, you initiate speech.
It's like trying to run modern high-end software through a bulky emulator on an old computer processor.
This is a perfect analogy.
Like the emulator has to translate every single line of code in real time. It takes up so much RAM that the whole system eventually lags and crashes.
Exactly. And in real life, conversations don't have a pause button.
Right. While you're sitting there doing mental gymnastics, trying to figure out if you should use went or gone,
Yeah.
the person you're talking to is already moving on, the silence stretches, the anxiety spikes, and your emulator crashes.
So to bypass that emulator,
Hmm.
you have to train your mind to generate thoughts directly in English, eliminating the native language intermediary entirely.
And the methodology suggests doing this through what they call micro-thoughts, integrated into your mundane daily routine.
Yeah.
Which I love because you turn your solitary life into a completely private, zero-stakes speaking laboratory.
Yes, no pressure.
The examples are incredibly practical. Like when you wake up, you consciously think, I am awake, and you say out loud, I need to get up. When you pick up your phone, you say, I have a message, I will check it.
And by narrating these microactions, you're building direct neural pathways between a real-world action and the English phrasing.
So you're skipping the translation.
Completely. You're conditioning your brain to associate the physical sensation of waking up directly with the English words.
And because no one is listening, the amygdala threat response we talked about earlier, it doesn't trigger.
Right, you're totally safe.
You can expand this into a more robust solo practice, too. The text mentions this 5 to 10 minute self-talk exercise.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Where you literally become the narrator of your own mundane life. You make tea and say, the water is boiling, I am pouring the water, I need sugar.
And coupling that narration with a self-Q&A practice really accelerates the process.
Asking yourself questions.
Yeah. Asking and answering questions out loud to yourself, like, what am I doing? I am reading.
Yeah.
What will I do later? I will go for a walk. By controlling both the input and the output, the question and the answer, in a zero-stress environment, you grease the cognitive tracks for rapid retrieval.
Wow.
You're teaching your brain that it possesses the capacity for spontaneous English generation.
But narrating your tea making in an empty room, I mean, that only solves half the problem.
Sure.
The real bottleneck happens when another human being introduces unpredictability into the equation. You step out of your laboratory, someone asks you a question, and suddenly the pressure is right back.
Yeah, and this introduces a conversational phenomenon we can call the one-answer dead end.
The one-answer dead end.
Someone asks you, where are you from? You successfully retrieve the English and reply, I am from Brazil. And then
Total silence.
total silence.
Yeah.
The other person asks another question, you give another short factual answer, and the interaction just abruptly dies.
Because the assumption is that you need a highly sophisticated vocabulary to sustain a deep conversation.
Right.
So when you realize you don't have those complex words queued up, you just shut down.
Yeah, but the fix for this is a structural tactic called the +1 detail.
The +1.
You don't need philosophical depth. You just need to append one microscopic extra detail to your basic answer.
Like a who, what, where, when, why, or how.
Exactly. It alters the entire trajectory of the interaction. If someone asks how you are, answering I am fine closes the door.
Yeah.
Answering I am fine, but I am a little tired today leaves the door wide open.
It changes. I watched a movie. I watched it last night.
Yes.
If conversation is a game of ping pong, giving a one-word answer is like catching the ball and just putting it in your pocket.
The game is over.
Exactly. The
Yeah.
game is over. The +1 detail puts a little spin on the ball, but you still have to hit it back over the net by asking a simple return question, right? Like, what did you do last night?
Right. And playing that game effectively requires us to look at the mechanics of listening.
Because to speak better English, you actually must listen better.
It's counterintuitive, but yes, when the amygdala is hijacked by the stress of speaking, your active listening completely deteriorates.
Because you're so busy desperately trying to construct your next perfect sentence while the other person is talking.
You aren't actually processing their words.
You're rehearsing your lines instead of participating in the play.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You miss the core semantic meaning of their sentence, which ironically makes your upcoming response even more difficult to formulate.
So to combat this panic, you have to seize control of the conversational pacing.
Yes.
And the text gives us these great survival phrases like, let me think about that. I am not entirely sure. Can you rephrase that?
Or could you speak a little slower?
Right.
These phrases are lifesavers because they give you permission to process. We have this illusion that fluency means speaking at a machine gun pace.
Like you have to be super fast.
Right. But taking a breath, pausing to formulate a thought, asking for clarification. Native speakers do this constantly.
The goal is connection, not speed.
Exactly. So we have the mechanics now. We know how to narrate our environment, bypass the mental emulator, and use the +1 strategy to keep the ping pong rally going.
But none of these tactics survive without the underlying engine of consistency.
Yep.
Spoken English has to become an integrated lifestyle, not a subject you just cram for on the weekend.
And the cognitive science regarding binge studying is very clear here.
Yeah.
If you study intensely for 3 hours on a Sunday and do absolutely nothing for the rest of the week, your brain undergoes synaptic pruning.
Synaptic pruning.
It actively discards the information because it isn't being recalled regularly. It's the spacing effect.
So you can't build neurological pathways with sporadic, massive loads.
It's like watering a plant with 10 gallons of water on the first of the month and then just leaving it in the desert.
It's going to drown, and then it's going to die of thirst.
Exactly. 10 to 15 minutes of daily distributed practice fundamentally alters the brain's architecture. And the methodology outlines a highly specific, low-friction daily routine to achieve this.
Right, it embeds the practice into existing habits. So, morning narration while making breakfast, that activates the English processing centers immediately upon waking. Then maintaining that momentum during the day by silently or, quietly narrating work tasks, it keeps the language centers engaged with your physical reality.
Then in the evening, you introduce a shadowing technique.
Shadowing. Now, this isn't just passive listening.
No, not at all. You take a short audio clip of a conversation, you listen to a single sentence, pause it, and immediately repeat it aloud.
Trying to perfectly mirror the rhythm, intonation, and speed.
Exactly. And shadowing is a powerful neurological tool because it bypasses Broca's area.
which is the part of brain responsible for language production and analytical processing.
Right. So by focusing purely on mimicking the cadence and musicality of the sentence, rather than analyzing the grammar, you develop muscle memory in the jaw and vocal cords.
You're training the physical hardware of speech.
Yes. You learn the melody of the language before you dissect the lyrics.
I love that.
The routine also incorporates reading a short text aloud to practice those physical sounds.
Mhm.
But the critical step happens when you close the book.
You have to summarize what you just read from memory.
Immediately. You force your brain to spontaneously generate ideas based on the input.
And that spontaneous generation is also applied to vocabulary acquisition, which I found fascinating. Because the traditional habit of writing a new English word next to its native language translation, the text says, that's a fatal error.
It really is, because it reinforces that translation lag emulator we talked about.
Ah, right. So the modified approach restricts you to just 5 new words a day, but mandates that you write them in simple contextualized English sentences.
So if the word is accomplish, you don't write the translation.
You write, I want to accomplish my goals today.
And you speak it out loud.
Right.
You immediately weaponize the vocabulary.
Yeah.
And then finally, right before sleep, you run a mental recap. You summarize your day out loud, which naturally forces you to practice the past tense.
Sneaky grammar practice.
Exactly. Then you verbalize your plan for tomorrow, triggering the future tense. It closes the loop.
Okay, but this is where I struggle, and I know listeners will too. There are days when your cognitive load is just maxed out.
Oh, for sure.
You've had a terrible day at work, you're physically exhausted, and the idea of narrating your evening in a second language feels like climbing Mount Everest.
Yeah.
If my brain is completely fried, isn't it better to just rest and skip a day rather than force a low-quality practice session?
The framework argues vehemently against breaking the chain.
Really?
The mandate is that even 5 minutes is non-negotiable. The objective on a terrible day is not language acquisition. The objective is protecting your psychological momentum.
Just keeping the habit alive.
Yes. Read a single paragraph. Shadow one sentence.
Just 5 minutes?
Just 5 minutes. Because consistency is incredibly fragile. When you execute a 5-minute practice on your worst day, you signal to your nervous system that this habit is a permanent fixture of your identity.
It prevents the rapid decay of the neural pathways you fought so hard to build. Exactly. So as we pull all these threads together, the core revelation of this entire methodology is that true fluency isn't a destination you arrive at once you've memorized the dictionary or mastered the subjunctive mood. Fluency is the ongoing, courageous ability to continue expressing your ideas despite your inevitable imperfections. It's about leveraging the simple truths of your environment, dismantling the mental emulator by narrating your life, and keeping the human connection alive with just one extra detail.
It represents a fundamental shift in identity.
Yeah.
You transition from viewing language as a strict academic test that you pass or fail,
Right.
to viewing it as a beautifully messy tool for navigating human relationships.
Which leads to a deeply provocative question for us to end on.
What's here?
If fluency is rooted in the willingness to express flawed ideas, and if clear communication always supersedes silent perfection, well, we have to consider the profound psychological cost of that silence. How much of your distinct personality, your specific wit, your unique lens on the world is entirely erased when you choose silence out of a fear of mispronouncing a vowel?
By hiding behind silence to protect our egos, we actively deny the world our authentic presence.
Exactly.
But if we invert that dynamic, if you actively embrace your vulnerability in a second language, allowing yourself to stumble and sound foolish sometimes, does that radical acceptance of imperfection actually cultivate a deeper empathy?
Ah, that's interesting.
Does it transform you into a more patient, attuned communicator, even when you return to your native tongue?
Does the friction of the struggle make you a better listener in every language?
I think so.
It is something you really need to sit with. And with that, I invite you right in this exact moment to execute your 5 minutes. Look at the space around you, open your mouth, and out loud tell me exactly what you see. The deep dive continues with you.